All right. Hey there. Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about how to naturally lower your blood sugar levels. We've got a ton of really interesting research here all about how the foods we eat can affect how our bodies balance sugar.
Yeah, and that's crucial for so many people these days.
Definitely. So our goal for you today is, well, it's pretty straightforward, but it's super important. We want to make sure you walk away with actionable strategies for managing blood sugar just through food. And who knows, maybe even help prevent type 2 diabetes down the line. And we're going to try to do it without throwing a bunch of confusing medical jargon at you, right?
It's really important to understand this stuff in plain language for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So, one of the first things that jumped out at us is that high blood sugar, it's becoming a way bigger problem than it used to be. And the sources we're looking at, they all agree that it can lead to some pretty serious health issues if you don't catch it.
Absolutely. The usual suspects are often to blame. Stress, uh, not enough exercise, eating the kind of processed foods that are everywhere these days, which, often leads to weight gain. And then there's even this growing idea that some of the stuff in our environment, like toxins and pollutants, could be messing with our blood sugar too. It's all connected.
Yeah, and what's really concerning is that it's not just older folks dealing with this anymore. We're seeing more and more younger people having high blood sugar. And when you consider the fact that Europe spends over 95 billion euros every single year just treating type 2 diabetes, it really drives home how big of a deal this is.
That's a huge number. And it highlights the urgency of finding ways to prevent it.
Totally. But the good news, and this is where it gets really interesting for you, is that our research actually suggests a lot of these type 2 diabetes cases, they could be prevented just by changing the way we eat.
Diet plays a huge role. That's clear from the research.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack today. Specific foods that have a natural knack for helping lower blood sugar.
Should we start with one that people might already be familiar with, psyllium husks?
Psyllium husks, yeah, that's a good one. It's funny because most people probably think of them for digestion and keeping things, regular.
Right. But what's fascinating is that because they're packed with fiber, they also help slow down how fast sugar gets absorbed into your bloodstream. It's not just about gut health, it's about blood sugar balance too.
Okay, so it's not just anecdotal. This actually has some science backing it up, right? I mean, our source mentioned a pretty big study from Duke University, a meta-analysis, they called it. Can you explain what that means exactly?
Sure. A meta-analysis basically takes a bunch of studies that have already been done on a particular topic and kind of combines all the data to get a clearer picture, a more robust understanding. This one was pretty extensive. It looked at something like 35 different studies that had been done over a span of 30 years, and this was across 3 continents. And they were all looking at how psyllium husks could affect the blood sugar levels. So a pretty comprehensive look at it.
Wow, that's a lot of data. So what did they find after all that? What was the big takeaway?
Well, they found that taking psyllium husks, particularly before meals, had a really positive effect on people who already had type 2 diabetes. Their blood sugar levels improved significantly. And not just their fasting blood sugar, which is, what you measure first thing in the morning before you eat, but also their HbA1c levels.
Okay. And just for everyone listening, HbA1c, that's kind of like a long-term average of your blood sugar levels. It shows what's been happening over the past few months, right?
Exactly. It's like a report card for your blood sugar. And that showed improvement, too, with psyllium.
That's really encouraging for people managing diabetes. What about people who are pre-diabetic? Was there any benefit for them?
Yeah, they saw improvements, too, though not as dramatic as those with type 2 diabetes. And interestingly, for people who are already healthy, psyllium didn't seem to have any effect on their blood sugar levels.
Oh, that's good to know. I guess you wouldn't want your blood sugar to go too low if it's already in a healthy range. So it sounds like psyllium is pretty smart. It kicks in when it's needed.
Precisely. It's targeted,
Yeah.
which is great for a natural approach. And another cool thing our source highlighted is that regularly using psyllium seems to help keep blood sugar levels more stable overall. It prevents those big spikes and crashes that can be really problematic.
Gotcha. So, okay, if you're listening and you want to try psyllium, what's the best way to do it? The source mentioned something about using powdered husks, right?
Yeah, that's right. It has to be powdered. The typical dosage they looked at was about 5 grams twice a day, taken half an hour before breakfast and dinner.
Okay, and there's something super important to remember when you're taking psyllium, isn't there? Something you absolutely have to do.
Oh, absolutely. Because psyllium is so high in fiber, it's super crucial to make sure you drink a lot of water after you take it, like a big glass, at least 300 milliliters. Otherwise, well, you could end up with some digestive issues.
Right, makes sense.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to something a little more spicy. Chili peppers. I've heard that they can be good for blood sugar.
Yeah, chilies are interesting. It's the capsaicin that gives them that heat. But turns out capsaicin also has some pretty cool properties for blood sugar control.
Okay, so the source mentioned a study from Australia back in 2006 that looked at something called hyperinsulinemia. Can you break that down for us? It sounds pretty complicated.
Well, it's actually not that complicated. It basically just means having high levels of insulin in your blood. And this often happens when your body starts to become resistant to insulin. When your cells don't respond as well to insulin's signal to take up sugar from the blood. This study looked at a group of people who were overweight and already had these high insulin levels, which is often a sign that they're on their way to developing type 2 diabetes. So they split these folks into two groups. One ate a diet completely free of chili for 4 weeks, and the other group ate 15 grams of chili every day for those 4 weeks.
That's a lot of chili. So what did they find after a month of this chili eating experiment?
The chili eaters ended up with significantly lower insulin levels compared to the group that avoided chili altogether. And they also had lower levels of something called C-peptide, which is another marker for insulin resistance, indicating that their bodies weren't having to work as hard to produce insulin.
Oh, okay, so I'm seeing the connection here. Lower insulin levels could mean better blood sugar control?
Exactly. And our source actually makes that connection directly, saying that high insulin levels often go hand in hand with high blood sugar. And they bring up another study from 2009 that used a test called an oral glucose tolerance test to further back this up.
Okay, for those of us who don't spend all day reading medical journals, what exactly is an oral glucose tolerance test?
It's pretty simple, actually. Basically, you drink a sugary drink, and then they track your blood sugar levels for a couple of hours to see how your body handles that sugar load. In this study, some people were given 5 grams of chili before they drank the sugary drink, and others were given a placebo, like a sugar pill with nothing in it.
Gotcha. And what happened? Did the chili make a difference?
It did. The people who had the chili before the sugar drink had a much smaller spike in their blood sugar levels, and their insulin response was better regulated compared to the people who just had the placebo.
That's pretty impressive. But I know some people listening are probably thinking, I can't handle spicy food.
Yeah.
So is there another way to get the benefits of capsaicin without, setting your mouth on fire?
Yeah, for sure. The source actually mentions that you can get capsaicin in capsule form. So if you don't like the heat but still want the benefits, that's a great option.
Perfect. Okay, up next, we've got onions. I mean, onions are great for flavor, and I know they're supposed to be good for your heart, but I didn't realize they could affect blood sugar.
Right, most people think of them for flavor or cholesterol, but it turns out onions do have some compounds that can help lower blood sugar, although you do have to eat a decent amount of them to really see an effect.
Okay, so how much are we talking about here? Like, how many onions do you have to eat to get the benefit? The source mentioned a study from 2010 that might give us a clue.
Yeah, this one was interesting. They took a group of people with both type 1 and type 2 diabetes who had been living with their condition for at least 2 years, and they divided them into 3 groups: an onion group, a water group, and a control group that just continued with their usual diabetes medication or insulin. The onion group had to eat 100 grams of raw sliced onions.
Whoa, that's a lot of raw onions. So what happened?
Well, for the people with type 1 diabetes, their fasting blood sugar went down by almost 90 milli-GDL after about 4 hours. The insulin group had a bigger drop, like 145 milli-GDL, and the water group barely changed at all, only 10 milli-GDL. Then they all did that oral glucose tolerance test, and the onion group did better than the water group, but not quite as well as the insulin group.
Okay, so it helped a little, but not as much as insulin. What about the people with type 2 diabetes?
For them, the onion group had their fasting blood sugar go down by about 40 milli-GDL, which was less than the medication group, who saw a drop twice as big. But here's the interesting part. After the sugary drink, the onions actually did a better job at preventing a big blood sugar spike than the medication. Their blood sugar went up by 159 milli-GDL, while the medication group went up by 114 milli-GDL. Even the water group did better than the medication group with a rise of only 55 milli-GDL.
Wow, that's surprising. So onions could actually be a really helpful tool for people managing type 2 diabetes.
That's what the researchers thought. They even suggested that onions could be used alongside diabetes medication to help prevent those really dangerous drops in blood sugar that can sometimes happen when you take medication. It could make the treatment more tolerable and safer.
That's a really valuable insight. Okay, let's switch gears to something a little sweeter. Grapefruit. I usually think of grapefruit for, like, weight loss, but does it really help with blood sugar, too?
Yeah, grapefruit has earned a reputation for being a natural blood sugar regulator. And it seems like the main reason for this is a kind called naringinin, which is a flavonoid, one of those plant compounds that are good for you. Naringinin is also what gives grapefruit that slightly bitter taste.
Ah, so that's why some people love it and others hate it. Okay, our source talked about some research from the University of Western Ontario that looked specifically at naringin. What did they find?
Well, their research suggests that naringinin might help lower blood sugar in a similar way to how insulin works in the body. And they also proposed that it could potentially help improve insulin sensitivity in people who are resistant to insulin, you know, when their cells aren't responding to insulin as well as they should.
That's pretty remarkable. And there's another substance in grapefruit that caught our attention in inositol.
Yes, and inositol is often talked about in the context of brain health, like it's good for nerve function and mood. But it also turns out to play a role in insulin sensitivity.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, inositol seems to help improve how well your cells respond to insulin, which means it could potentially help reduce insulin resistance. And one of the best sources of inositol is freshly squeezed grapefruit juice. It has way more than a lot of other foods, although if you're drinking processed grapefruit juice, it probably has less inositol.
Good to know. But there is a pretty big warning about grapefruit that we have to mention here. This is really important for everyone listening.
Absolutely. This is crucial. Grapefruit can interact with a lot of different medications, and it can either make them less effective or even increase the risk of side effects. So if you're taking any kind of medication, you really need to talk to your doctor or pharmacist before you start eating grapefruit or drinking grapefruit juice regularly. It could be dangerous.
Absolutely. Safety first, always. Okay, let's move on to a breakfast classic. Oats. I mean, everyone knows oats are healthy, but they can actually help lower blood sugar, too.
Yeah, they're more than just a healthy breakfast. Our source even talks about something called oat cures.
Oat cures? What in the world is that?
Apparently it's a thing in some places, especially in Europe. You basically eat a diet that's almost entirely oats for a few days, like you're getting 800 to 1,000 calories a day, and most of it is from oat flakes or porridge. There was a study done by this doctor, Alexander Lammert, at Uniklinikum Mannheim in Germany, where they had people with type 2 diabetes eat only cooked oat porridge for 2 days, with a total of about 1,000 calories per day.
So what happened? Did their blood sugar improve?
Yeah, it did. And not just for a short time, the effect lasted for over 4 weeks. The people in the study needed significantly less insulin after those 2 days of just eating oats. There was another study mentioned that was even more impressive. It looked at people who had such high blood sugar that they would normally need to go to the hospital. But after a couple of days on this oat cure, their blood sugar came down so much that they didn't need to be hospitalized. They were able to manage it with less insulin and diabetes medication.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. So even if you're not doing a full-on oat cure, making oats a regular part of your diet is still a good idea.
Definitely. Our source recommends including oats regularly, even after you've done a cure. So things like oatmeal with fruit for breakfast, oat burgers for lunch, stuff like that.
Okay, so what is it about oats that makes them so good for regulating blood sugar? Is it just the fiber?
Well, the fiber definitely plays a big role. Oats are high in a particular type of fiber called beta-glucans, which are soluble, they dissolve in water. And beta-glucans are known for slowing down digestion and reducing how quickly sugar gets absorbed into your bloodstream. So they help prevent those big blood sugar spikes after meals. But they also help lower cholesterol, which is another bonus.
Awesome. So it's like a double whammy. What else?
There's also a good source of magnesium, which is a mineral that's involved in blood sugar control. And they've got a good amount of antioxidants and B vitamins.
Our source specifically mentioned that B vitamins are really important for people with diabetes. Why is that?
Well, it seems that people with diabetes often have lower levels of certain B vitamins, and as the condition progresses, these levels can drop even further. Getting enough B vitamins can make a big difference in how well your body regulates blood sugar. And in general, studies have shown that regularly eating porridge can help lower blood sugar and might even reduce your risk of developing diabetes by as much as a third.
That's a pretty good reason to start your day with a bowl of oatmeal. Okay, next up we've got cinnamon. I love cinnamon, and I know it's supposed to be good for you, but I didn't realize it could actually lower blood sugar.
Yeah, cinnamon has been used for medicinal purposes for a really long time. And one of its traditional uses is actually for helping to lower blood sugar. Researchers have found that it seems to work by helping your body use glucose more efficiently, almost like how insulin works.
Our source mentioned a study from back in 2003 by a Dr. Richard Anderson. What did that study show?
This study looked at 60 people with type 2 diabetes, and they found that taking cinnamon every day significantly reduced their blood sugar levels after 40 days. And what's really interesting is that those positive effects continued for another 3 weeks, even after they stopped taking the cinnamon daily. So it seemed to have a lasting effect. And the amount that seemed to be effective was pretty small, just about half a teaspoon per day.
That's easy enough to incorporate. And there was another study from 2016, this time in Iraq, that confirmed these benefits, right?
Yeah, that study looked at people who had type 2 diabetes that wasn't well controlled even though they were taking a common diabetes drug. They gave half of them a gram of cinnamon every day for 12 weeks and the other half a placebo. And the group who took cinnamon saw a significant drop in their fasting blood sugar after just 6 weeks, both compared to where they started and compared to the placebo group. They also had improvements in their HbA1c levels and their markers of oxidative stress.
Oxidative stress, huh?
Yeah.
Remind me what that means again.
Basically, it's when there's an imbalance in your body's cells, and it can contribute to all sorts of health problems. Taking cinnamon in this study was linked to higher levels of two powerful antioxidants that your body naturally produces, glutathione and SOD. And it led to a decrease in something called malondialdehyde, which is a substance that goes up when there's more oxidative stress.
Okay, so less oxidative stress is a good thing. And there was another even bigger study from 2019, right?
Yes, this one had 140 people with type 2 diabetes, and they took half a gram of cinnamon twice a day for 3 months. It showed improvements in a lot of different areas, including their BMI, body fat, belly fat, fasting insulin levels, insulin resistance, long-term blood sugar, HbA1c, and even their blood lipids like cholesterol. And it seemed to be particularly beneficial for people who had a BMI over 27.
So it sounds like adding cinnamon to your diet could be really helpful for managing blood sugar. Our source recommended Ceylon cinnamon specifically, right?
Yes, that's right. Aim for about a gram of Ceylon cinnamon per day.
Perfect. All right, let's talk about something a little more unusual. Tiger nuts. I've seen them popping up in health food stores, but I'm not sure what they are exactly.
Well, despite the name, they're not actually nuts. They're these small tubers that grow on a type of grass in the Mediterranean. They kind of taste like a cross between a hazelnut and an almond, which is probably why they're called tiger nuts.
Okay, interesting. So what makes them good for blood sugar?
They're packed with fiber, like 25 to 30% fiber, which is a lot. That high fiber content helps slow down the absorption of sugar into your bloodstream, so you don't get those big blood sugar spikes after you eat.
There was a study from Egypt in 2010 that looked at tiger nuts and blood sugar, right?
Yeah, this one was interesting. It was done with women who were overweight and had diabetes, and they had them eat a pudding made with tiger nut flour twice a day before lunch and dinner for 4 weeks. The results showed that it not only helped them lose weight and improve their cholesterol levels, but also improved their blood sugar control.
So tiger nuts for dessert. Sounds good to me. What are some other ways to include them in your diet?
Well, you can make that pudding, of course, but you can also just sprinkle a couple tablespoons of tiger nut flakes on your cereal or yogurt, mix them in with berries, or even add them to soups. They've got a nice nutty flavor, so they're pretty versatile.
I'll have to try that. Okay, moving on to another food that people might be surprised to see on this list. Blueberries. I always thought fruit was off limits if you're watching your blood sugar.
That's a really common misconception. But the truth is, some fruits, especially berries like blueberries, can actually help you control your blood sugar. They've been shown to not only lower blood sugar, but also improve how well your cells can take up sugar. And blueberries have a bunch of other benefits too. They're good for your brain, your heart, and they even have some cancer-fighting properties.
Okay, so blueberries are a definite yes. What is it about them that makes them so powerful?
It seems to be mostly due to these compounds called anthocyanins, which are antioxidants that give blueberries their dark blue color. They're responsible for a lot of those health benefits.
Our source mentioned a study from 2010 that looked at blueberries and insulin balance. What did they find?
This study was well designed. It was what they called double-blind, meaning that neither the researchers nor the participants knew who was getting the real treatment and who was getting a placebo. They had 32 people who had insulin resistance but didn't yet have diabetes, and they gave them either a blueberry smoothie or a placebo smoothie twice a day for 6 weeks.
And the results?
The blueberry group ended up with much better insulin sensitivity than the placebo group. It seems like blueberries could really help people who are insulin resistant lower their risk of developing diabetes. And importantly, blueberries themselves don't cause big blood sugar spikes. They have a low glycemic index.
That's good to know. And they did a similar study with people who already had diabetes in 2011.
Yes, they did. And in that study, they had people with diabetes eat 3 servings a day of low glycemic fruits, including blueberries, for 3 months. And their blood sugar levels improved significantly. So it seems like blueberries are a good option for people with diabetes too.
Amazing. Okay, on to something a little more surprising. Raisins. I mean, they're sweet, so you'd think they'd be bad for blood sugar.
You'd think so, but it turns out that raisins might actually be better for your blood sugar than something like white bread, even though they're sweeter.
Really? That's interesting. What's the evidence for that?
There was a review of studies done at the University of Kentucky in 2013 that suggested raisins could actually lower your risk of both heart disease and diabetes. And then in 2014, another study looked specifically at how raisins affect blood sugar and insulin levels.
How did they do that study?
They had people eat a breakfast of either 100 grams of white bread, about 70 grams of raisins, or about 30 grams of raisins. And then they measured their blood sugar and insulin levels for 2 hours after eating.
And what did they find?
Both of the raisin breakfasts led to significantly lower blood sugar and insulin levels compared to the white bread. It surprised a lot of people because, on paper, raisins should have a higher glycemic load than white bread, but it turns out they don't affect your body the same way. Researchers in Canada and the US actually classified raisins as having a low glycemic index, a low glycemic load, and a low insulin index.
So raisins are a good snack option even if you're watching your blood sugar.
That's what the research suggests. They can be a healthy choice, not just for people who don't have any blood sugar issues, but also for people with diabetes or insulin resistance. Plus, they're full of fiber, antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals.
That's good news for me. I love raisins. Okay, let's move on to ginger. Ginger is great for so many things, upset stomachs, colds, but it can help with blood sugar too.
Yeah, ginger is like a wonder spice. It has so many potential benefits, from helping with nausea and pain to reducing inflammation. And it turns out it can even help lower your blood sugar.
I'm curious how that works.
Well, one of the ways it seems to work is by reducing insulin resistance. So it helps your cells become more sensitive to insulin, which means your body can use glucose more effectively, and that leads to lower blood sugar levels.
Our source highlighted a study from Iran in 2015 that looked at ginger and blood sugar. What did that study show?
In that study, they took 41 people with type 2 diabetes and gave half of them 2 grams of powdered ginger every day for 3 months. The other half got a placebo. And the ginger group had significant reductions in their fasting blood sugar and other important blood sugar markers like HbA1c and that oxidative stress marker we talked about, amylaldehyde. They did much better than the placebo group.
That's pretty impressive. Just a little bit of ginger every day made a noticeable difference. Okay, let's talk about turmeric. Turmeric is everywhere these days, from lattes to supplements. Is it really as good as everyone says it is?
Turmeric has a long history of use in traditional medicine, especially in Ayurveda, and it's become very popular in recent years for a good reason. It's a really powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant.
And our source suggested that it might even be one of the reasons why people in Asian countries have lower rates of diabetes, right?
Yeah, that's one theory, since turmeric is used so often in Asian cooking. And the main active compound in turmeric that seems to be responsible for most of its health benefits is curcumin.
Right, curcumin. I've heard of that. Our source likely has a whole separate article dedicated to turmeric and its effects on blood sugar, which we'll link to in the show notes. But for now, what are some easy ways to get more turmeric in your diet?
Well, you can add it to your cooking, of course, but a popular way to consume it is in a drink called golden milk. You basically warm up some milk, almond milk, coconut milk, whatever you prefer, and add turmeric, ginger, maybe some black pepper, and a little sweetener. It's delicious and very soothing.
Sounds good. I'll have to try that. All right, next up, walnuts. Are all nuts good for blood sugar, or is there something special about walnuts?
All nuts are generally healthy, but walnuts seem to be especially beneficial for people with diabetes. There was a study in Europe back in 2009 that showed that people with type 2 diabetes who ate walnuts every day had better insulin levels compared to those who didn't.
And how many walnuts are we talking about? Like a whole bag?
Not quite. The study suggested that just 30 grams a day, that's about a handful, was enough to see a benefit.
That's manageable. What is it about walnuts that makes them so good for blood sugar?
Well, they're mainly made up of polyunsaturated fats, which include omega-3 fatty acids, and omega-3s are known for helping to lower both blood sugar and insulin levels. But they're also packed with vitamin E and other antioxidants, which are good for overall health and can protect against the damage caused by diabetes. Plus, they're good for your heart and your blood vessels, which is especially important for people with diabetes.
So a handful of walnuts a day keeps the doctor away, or at least helps with blood sugar. Okay, let's talk about something a little less familiar. Wakame seaweed. I've seen it on sushi menus, but I've never actually tried it.
Wakame is a type of brown seaweed that's very common in Asian cuisine. It's often added to salads, soups, and stir-fries. And scientists at Hokkaido University in Japan discovered that it contains a powerful antioxidant called fucoxanthin that could potentially help prevent diabetes.
How does that work?
Well, according to the lead researcher, Dr. Kazuo Miyashita, fucoxanthin helps the liver produce more DHA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid, and that has an anti-diabetes effect. It might also help with fat burning, which is another way to reduce your risk of diabetes because excess fat, especially around your organs, is a big risk factor for type 2 diabetes.
Interesting. So, should we all be eating wakame seaweed every day?
Well, there's a catch. Like other seaweeds, wakame can be quite high in iodine. And while iodine is important for thyroid health, too much of it can actually be harmful. So our source recommends eating wakame about once a week, just to be safe.
Okay, good to know. Moderation is key, as always. Now, onto another ingredient I'm not super familiar with, fenugreek. I think I've seen it in Indian recipes.
Yeah, fenugreek is a common spice in India and other parts of South Asia. It's often used in curries and lentil dishes. And it turns out that it might be really helpful for preventing diabetes.
Really? There's research on that.
Yeah, there was a study in 2015 where they gave people with prediabetes 5 grams of fenugreek seed powder twice a day before meals for 3 years. And the results were pretty amazing. The people who took fenugreek were much less likely to develop full-blown diabetes than the people who didn't. In fact, the control group had a risk of developing diabetes that was over 4 times higher. Plus, the fenugreek group had lower fasting blood sugar after meals, lower LDL cholesterol, and they became more sensitive to insulin.
That's a lot of benefits from one little spice.
Yeah.
So how can people incorporate fenugreek into their diet? What does it taste like?
It has a slightly bitter, earthy flavor, but you can toast the seeds to make them a little more nutty. And then you can add them to all sorts of savory dishes. It goes well with things like potatoes, vegetables, rice, and other spices like coriander, cumin, cinnamon, pepper, and cloves. If you want to reduce the bitterness, you can soak the seeds overnight. You can also make fenugreek tea, just soak the seeds and then boil them or simmer them for a bit. Adding a little cinnamon helps with the taste. And you can even sprout the seeds and add them to salads or Indian dishes.
Wow, that's a lot of options. Okay, this next one might surprise some people. Maple syrup. I thought sugar was off limits if you're trying to manage your blood sugar.
Well, maple syrup is still a sweetener, so you definitely don't want to overdo it. But it does have some interesting compounds that could actually be beneficial for people with diabetes. Researchers at the University of Rhode Island found over 20 beneficial compounds in maple syrup, and 13 of them were completely new discoveries. A lot of these compounds seem to have antibacterial properties, and they might even help protect against cancer and diabetes.
What else is in maple syrup that's good for you?
Well, it provides some minerals like zinc and calcium, and it's also a good source of vitamin B1, which is important for how your body processes sugar. But one of the most interesting compounds for diabetes is something called quegacol, which is formed during the heating process when they're making the syrup. Quegacol is a phenolic compound that seems to be able to block 2 specific enzymes that play a role in diabetes.
So there might be some real benefits to maple syrup, but you still have to be careful with it, right?
Absolutely. It's still almost 70% sugar, so moderation is key. Stick to a teaspoon or 2 a day at most. And our source actually suggests a better alternative for sweetening things: Yakan syrup.
Ah, yes, yakan syrup and yakan powder, too. Our source highlighted these as having even more potential benefits for people with type 2 diabetes than maple syrup.
That's right. Yakan syrup and powder are both natural sweeteners that come from the root of the yakan plant, which is native to South America. And they're very low in calories and don't raise your blood sugar levels.
Why not? What makes them different from other sweeteners?
They're packed with something called fructooligosaccharides, or FOS. FOS are a type of carbohydrate that your body can't digest. So even though they taste sweet, they don't get absorbed into your bloodstream and don't raise your blood sugar. In fact, they can actually help lower blood sugar and improve insulin sensitivity. Yakan syrup is also a prebiotic, which means it feeds the good bacteria in your gut, and that can be really beneficial for people with diabetes. And on top of all that, it might help with calcium absorption and blood fat regulation.
Wow, that's impressive. So yacon syrup sounds like a winner for anyone looking for a healthy way to sweeten their food.
Definitely. It's a great option for people with diabetes or anyone who's just trying to cut back on sugar.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. For people who are feeling a little overwhelmed, what are the main takeaways they should remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that food really can be medicine. By making smart choices about what you eat, you can have a huge impact on your blood sugar levels and your overall health.
And it's not just about adding a sprinkle of cinnamon here and there. It's about creating a healthy dietary pattern overall, right?
Exactly. Aim for a diet that's rich in whole, unprocessed foods, like fruits,